Hi everyone, welcome back to AP Psychology with me, Miss Baines, your teacher, where you can take advantage of being able to pause and rewind me as I deliver you your latest content. Go ahead and grab those colored markers, a comfy space in which to work, and of course, don't forget those ever important binder notes that go lockstep in order with this video called Unit 7, Video 3, The Motivation of SEX, on pages 7 and 8 of your new Unit 7 binder notes. I'll see you on the other side. Okay, hi, welcome back everyone. Our next set of notes in Unit 7 on motivation is all about our sex drive. It is about the sexual activity, which is a very biological part of all organisms, not just human beings necessarily, because it's what allows us to move on as a particular species, right? Back to that evolutionary psyche. What we need to do is look at this from a very objective, academic, and scholarly point of view. But I do want to point out that if this feels kind of awkward for you, or if you're kind of giggling or like, oh man, this should be really interesting, you should think about how there are cultural influences on our ideas and our perceptions and our expectations surrounding sex. And that sex is incredibly biological as well as incredibly cultural and social. And the social cultural part of sex is ever changing, I guess you could say. But it is incredibly impactful on the act. So let's talk about this. So the psychology of sex and hunger is response to a need, right? A drive. If we don't eat, for example, we die. Well, sex in that sense is not a need. If we do not have sex, we don't actually die. It's just that our species as a continued whole never lives on if we don't procreate. But there's a lot more to it for our species than just reproduction, right? Here's a kind of biological, psychological, and social cultural impact on sexual motivation. And that's that there is a very complex yet simple biological factors along with sexual maturity, the hormones, and the sexual orientation. Notice how sexual orientation is under biology. It's biological, and we're going to talk about that. The psychological being the exposure to stimulating conditions, say sexual fantasies, and then the social cultural, right? So the family, and then the societal values like religion and personal values. And that's where the cultural expectations come into play. So the scientific study of sex, the first major study was in the late 1940s. In the late 1940s and early 1950s, Alfred Kinsey interviewed over 17,000, just about 17,000 everyday people about their sexual behaviors. They rated their behavior on a scale from 0 to 6, exclusively heterosexual and exclusively homosexual in the 1970s. Masters and Johnson brought sex into a laboratory and actually studied sex by directly observing and recording physiological patterns of people engaging in the sex activity. And that's kind of where they came up with all of the sexual response cycle. Okay, so on the left here, being the phase and then the physiological response and what is going on. And yes, you need to know what each of these are, both for male and females, but then knowing the order too, and that it starts with first over here, excitement, and ends in a sort of resolution. So excitement being an increase in blood flow to the areas that are involved in sexual intercourse. They plateau, being the maximum level of arousal to reach an orgasm phase, being a release of all that sexual tension. And then the resolution phase is the body returning to pre-excitement state. And there is a kind of refractory phase. The woman's resolve is a little bit slower, and the entire process is slower for women. And if you look down in the notes over there, I've provided you to see the psychology of sex, and we need to quickly just talk about sexual cues and scripts. So Sexual cues, much of sexual motivation comes from the brain. And there's different cues that kind of might start this response cycle. So what individuals find sexually arousing is dependent upon many different stimuli, including conditioned ones and items you learn to respond to. So not just psychology of sex, but there's a learning process. And that being influenced by our society and culture, our sexual scripts are socially learned programs of sexual interpretation and responsiveness. This is derived from the individual's culture. So media, in particular, seems to be one way that many devise their sexual scripts. But this can lead to unreliable and unrealistic ideals. And it may not be very realistic that that will happen for you, actually. But again, it all kind of goes back to what is learned. But then again, culturally influenced things are important too. Let's talk about sexual orientation. Sexual orientation refers to a person's preference for both emotional, not just sexual, but both emotional and sexual relationships with individuals of the same sex, other sex, or either sex. So someone who is homosexual, right? Homo being the same, right? That homogeneous groups are groups that are the same. So homosexual would be of the same sex. Heterosexual, just like heterogeneous, groups are different. There are varying levels. So heterosexual is the opposite sex. And then we have bisexual, which is either one. So where does our sexual orientation come from? Most psychologists today view sexual orientation as neither willfully chosen nor willfully changed. It's just what is. Scientifically supported, this view has changed drastically from a time when homosexuality was once in the Diagnostic Statistical Manual for Mental Disorders, the DSM, right? The Book of Psychological Disorders, behavior as abnormal psychology, right? Deviant. Homosexuality was there as a mental disorder. So yes, we have come a long way, but a lot of people would argue that we have a long way to go. The view remains a controversial one due to societal, political, and moral factors. Most of the scientific theories point to a biological or genetic cause of sexual orientation, most of those being that are recognized by the American Psychological Association. So the size of the anterior hypothalamus is smaller, and an anterior commissure is larger in homosexual men. And there is an actual difference in the brain structure. A number of reasons suggest that homosexuality may be due to genetic reasons. So homosexuality seems to run in certain families. This does not mean that a little girl who is, say, adopted by a homosexual female couple is then going to turn into a homosexual. No. Because they are not genetically related. What this is saying is that homosexuality seems to genetically run in families. Twin studies with homosexuality is even more common in identical twins than it is in fraternal twins. However, there are mixed results. There is another genetic factor in that when one twin is homosexual, the other one is more likely to also be homosexual, showing that there is a genetic factor. Genetic engineers can genetically manipulate female fruit flies to act like males. To manipulate female fruit flies to act like males during courtship, and for males to act like females as a kind of interesting experiment. They've simplified what it is to act male and what it is to act female in the courtship process for fruit flies, and they can change it. Prenatal hormones also impact sexual orientation during the critical periods of fetal development. This is usually between 2 and 5 months after conception. An animal's testosterone's exposure to the fetus results in a female sheep showing homosexual behaviors. So female sheep fetuses that were exposed to testosterone in abnormally high levels then showed homosexual behavior. right? This also happened with human beings. The female hormone exposure to males or female fetuses results in an attraction to male human beings, and the female hormones being progesterone or estrogen. It's kind of interesting. And yes, there is definitely a genetic factor in that it can run genetically in families, but then it also has this factor in prenatal development, which can be environmental. Okay, that's it for sex for today. I'll see you tomorrow. Have a great night. Bye now.